This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Microsoft's focus on the cloud pays off as revenue soars past the highest estimates. We'll break down the tech giant's fourth quarter scorecard. Plus, Elon Musk says he's got the green light for his underground tunnel project. We'll dig into the Hyperloop he says can get you from New York to D.C. in under a half hour. And Hulu steps up to the plate in a streaming battle against Amazon and Netflix. CEO Mike Hopkins joins us on the race to rule content in the golden age of television. But first, to our lead. Microsoft shares are rising in extended trading, up as much as 2.7%. After reporting sales and profit that topped estimates in the fourth quarter, adjusted sales rose 9% as demand almost doubled for Microsoft's Azure cloud service. It all points to the company's turnaround plan working. And investors are closely following CEO Satya Nadella's plan to reshape Microsoft as a cloud computing powerhouse with new services related to Azure and Office 365, a shift that led to a massive Salesforce restructuring earlier this month. More specifically, Azure sales rose 97% in the period, while commercial Office 365, that's the cloud-based versions of Word, Excel, and other productivity software, increased 43%. Joining us now to break it all down, our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson. So we got to talk about the cloud first.
Yeah.
Big progress.
I mean, well, it's amazing growth. I mean, this is one of the biggest businesses out there in the cloud. Indeed, only Amazon Web Services is bigger and sort of pure cloud business.
How much bigger is Amazon?
We don't really know, but probably about 4 or 5 times bigger, probably about 5 times bigger. Nonetheless, it's a very big business. Azure's a very big business, and growing, as you mentioned, 97% year-over-year growth rate is really terrific for them, and it just shows you that they've used the strengths that they had, particularly Microsoft Office, to move corporate customers from just Office to Office and in this case, Office and the cloud. And that cloud business, when a lot of their dedicated Office customers who are already storing stuff using Office 365 and other things, you're already using Azure and have some comfort with that, they're willing to go to Microsoft for their cloud needs. And so they're really benefiting from that industry trend and their existing connections with customers.
I'm curious how much Microsoft is actually a threat to Amazon in this business, because obviously Microsoft's cloud business is growing, but so is the cloud business overall.
Absolutely a threat. Yeah, you know, I think when you look at who the big offerings are going to be for this in this industry, it's going to be Amazon, Microsoft, Rackspace, Google, IBM, and Oracle. And those are the big companies out there. And what's amazing is that the prices keep coming down. Amazon's been very aggressive about cutting prices. And that's probably the biggest worry Microsoft has going forward, is that they want bigger margins than Amazon's going to want going forward. So can Amazon continue to cut price and have the big offerings? Because the other thing that Amazon's doing is adding more and more services and more types of software offerings and more types of compute solutions to really make this a very competitive business and stay in the lead.
That said, Microsoft is also spending a lot to expand this business, spending a lot of money on data centers. How much is it costing them? Well,
the collapse in margins is the place you sort of see it the most, is that traditionally Microsoft had a very high gross margin business, it's software, and didn't take a lot of reinvention, so the R&D costs were de minimis compared to what the revenues were like, indeed the recurring revenues were like. And now with Microsoft, they're having to spend a lot more money in R&D to try to keep up with Microsoft and with Amazon and Google and others.
Now, last quarter we saw a big decline in Surface revenue. They have rolled out some new devices. How is the hardware line doing?
The hardware business is not very big for them, and I think in a lot of ways it was a way for them to sort of lead and show by example. Interestingly, the computing business, the PC business, if you will, I think they call it like more personal computing, which is ridiculous. More personal, intelligent cloud. If they had a stupid cloud business, I would allow them the adjective intelligent cloud, but can we strip adjectives from business names? Okay, soapbox, I'm done. Their PC business, constant currency, down only 1%. That's a home run victory in this environment where only Apple is seeing growth in PCs.
Speaking of personal, PC shipments continue to fall. What does that mean for Microsoft overall, given the Windows business?
Well, again, you know, this could have been a lot worse for them. We've talked about, over the course of doing Bloomberg TV, you and I have been talking about a PC industry that was once growing,
7
and then it was falling
and counting.
5%, 6%, 7%, 8% growth in certain quarters of year-over-year in IDC numbers. Again, down 1%. they would happily take that while they grow this other business. But the other thing I'll say is that the, I don't always like this comparison of looking at Wall Street estimates. As you know, I always look at what Wall Street's thinking, not what the business is doing. But what this move into cloud and the rapid growth of cloud means is that the quarters are less predictable than they used to be from Microsoft. Even at Microsoft, they don't know how they're going to do because they've got this sort of tiger by the tail in the cloud, and so the results can be surprising. We saw that last quarter when sales disappointed. You've had 2 of the last 6 quarters having sales below the estimates, which just sort of shows how unpredictable their business is. All
right, Corey Johnson, our editor at large, thanks for breaking it all down. We'll be listening into the Microsoft earnings call momentarily. More earnings we are watching out of Europe. SAP fell as much as 1.3% in Europe after second quarter cloud margins were worse than analysts expected. It raised its revenue outlook and sales forecast and said it would buy back up to €500 million in stock. UBS said the higher guidance and buyback may balance disappointing margins. SAP CEO Bill McDermott spoke to Bloomberg earlier today.
We have invested very heavily in 2 areas in the first half of the year. One is hiring the very best people at a real accelerated clip because we wanted to get the leverage from those hires in the back end of the year. So you'll see us slow it down because we went fast. The second thing is we invested in the cloud.
Coming up, Elon Musk's Hyperloop project may have cleared a huge hurdle. We will explain next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Shares of Qualcomm fell the most in 6 months. The stock slid 5% in Friday's session. The biggest maker of chips used in mobile phones forecasting steep declines in profit and licensing sales, underscoring its dependence on the royalties that Apple has stopped paying. Well, Elon Musk sent the tech and transportation world into a tizzy earlier today when he tweeted, "Just received verbal government approval for the Boring Company to build an underground New York, Philly, Baltimore, D.C. Hyperloop. New York to D.C. in 29 minutes. Musk later set the record straight, tweeting, "Still a lot of work needed to receive formal approval, but I'm optimistic that will occur rapidly." Joining us now is Max Chafkin, who has covered Elon Musk's quote-unquote Boring Company for Bloomberg Businessweek. Elon took you down into the tunnels. What do you make of the idea that regulators would actually give Musk approval at all for this?
Well, saying verbal approval it could mean any number of things. If I'm reading the tea leaves here, I'm thinking it could have been some kind of positive signal from the federal government. We know that he has had some conversations with the White House about the idea of digging tunnels, assumedly as part of some kind of infrastructure project. It could also have something to do with the government of D.C. Like these projects would involve a tangle of different regulations, local, state, federal. So it could be any number of things, and verbal seems very small. What it really sounds like is Musk is serious about, or getting more serious about, digging these tunnels and is trying to build support, both I would assume political support, and maybe even start to think about raising money or how he's going to pay for this.
Now, Max, literally as we've been speaking, I got a statement from a Boring Company spokesperson saying the Boring Company has had a number of promising conversations with local, state, and federal government officials. With a few exceptions, feedback has been very positive, and we've received verbal support from key government decision makers for tunneling plans, including a Hyperloop route from New York to D.C. We look forward to future conversations with the cities and states along this route, and we expect to secure the formal approvals necessary to break ground later this year. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like they're basically fleshing it out. I think the key thing here is that, first of all, it's very, very early. There's a lot of stuff, especially when you're talking about the actual Hyperloop, this super fast train. There's a lot of stuff, technical hurdles that they would have to cross that have nothing to do with regulation. That said, I think what Elon Musk is keying into here is, number one, a lot of these big, they're called mega projects, have gone very poorly. Obviously the Second Avenue subway in New York took something like 100 years. The subways in LA have cost billions of dollars. Seattle has this failed Big Bertha, or not failed, but problematic project called Big Bertha. I think Elon Musk thinks, I'm going to be able to sort of use some of my know-how, some of the same sort of playbook that I used to make rocket travel a little bit cheaper. He's managed to cut the cost of a launch by quite a bit, bring that to this kind of unloved field at a time when there's suddenly a lot of enthusiasm, on both sides of the aisle for some kind of infrastructure spending.
Any chance Musk is trying to drum up enthusiasm by tweeting right away that he's gotten verbal approval?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, and I think he almost sort of came out and said it afterwards, saying that, if you care about this, you should talk to your legislators, talk to, your local governments, federal government, state government. I think that's 100% what he's doing. And if you remember back to when he started SpaceX, it was kind of similar. It started with, first of all, no special expertise. And I think he had this sort of initial plan where he was going to build a greenhouse on Mars and use that as kind of like a way to attract attention. So this kind of like attention-grabbing, move is not something that's totally new as far as the Musk playbook. And this is a guy who has a track record for doing this sort of thing. Some of these projects that he undertakes don't end up, coming to fruition. They don't really go anywhere. And he's kind of said as much, saying that he thinks a lot of people are acting as if this is going to fail. On the other hand, it's where his expertise is, and he seems to be, most comfortable when he has, as many balls in the air as possible. So I guess that's what he's doing.
Before you go, Max, I also want to ask you about a story you have out in Bloomberg Business Week. Of course, more news regarding President Trump coming out of Washington, publicly rebuking his attorney general in an interview with the New York Times. The scoop that Bob Mueller's investigation is moving to cover Trump's business interests. Meantime, you've got a story in Business Week titled "Trump's Washington is Kicking Silicon Valley's Butt." How so? Yeah,
there was this sort of meme that came out around the protests around the Trump immigration stuff in February that was like Silicon Valley is going to be this key source of protest. What happened last week, while sort of no one was paying attention, is the Trump administration basically killed this thing called the International Entrepreneur Rule. And this was a very modest sort of bit of immigration reform that would have allowed an entrepreneur to basically stay in the U.S. visa-free. It's something that people in the Valley, especially venture capitalists, have been pushing for years and years, since 2009. And, it's one of these like inoffensive measures. You think it would be relatively uncontroversial, it had bipartisan support, and with barely a whimper, it was killed. And it's possible, yeah, that the Silicon Valley will be able to move somewhere on immigration reform, but right now it seems like a lot of these efforts that they've put forward, there's a new thing from Mark Pincus and Reid Hoffman, Sam Altman of Y Combinator has one, haven't really caught much traction, and that's kind of the point I was trying to make.
So Dick Costolo, the former CEO of Twitter, was on the show a couple weeks ago and said, look, Trump may be meeting with tech leaders, but it doesn't appear that he's actually listening. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think there's some question of, at a certain point, like, why are you going to these meetings if it's just resulting in a bunch of humiliating photos and not much else? I do think, if this thing that Elon Musk is talking about, were to happen, I mean, I think you'd have to look at that as well. That would be an instance where engagement has paid off. But so far, it seems like, Silicon Valley has come to the Trump administration wanting to talk about immigration, wanting to and it hasn't gone anywhere. Basically, Trump has gone in the exact opposite direction.
All right, Max Chafkin of Bloomberg Business Week. Thanks so much, Max, as always, for stopping by. You can read Max's story in this week's edition of Bloomberg Business Week on newsstands now. Coming up, Hulu is taking a victory lap after its original show, Handmaid's Tale, snagged 13 Emmy nominations. We'll hear from CEO Mike Hopkins about how the company is getting noticed in the crowded streaming space. This is Bloomberg. In media news, negotiations to acquire media company Scripps Networks are advancing, and a deal could be announced as soon as this month. This, according to people familiar with the matter. Both Discovery Communications and Viacom are vying to buy the company. Meantime, Hulu is luring top-notch talent for its big push into original content. We spoke with CEO Mike Hopkins in Aspen about how the company is going directly up against Amazon and Netflix, thanks to its latest success with The Handmaid's Tale, which just received 13 Emmy nominations.
You know, we started original programming at Hulu 5 years ago, and our most recent batch started about 1.5 years ago, and we've been in business with some of the best out there, J.J. Abrams, Jason Katims, Amy Poehler, and but this one is really special. It really has broken through in a way that nothing ever has for us, and so we're really excited about it.
How do you get people outside of LA and New York to watch it?
Well, they do. You know, a large chunk of our viewership is actually in the middle of the country. We do a lot of marketing all over the country, and it's a story that resonates not just in New York and LA, but all over the world.
So what is the mix of originals versus licensed content?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's from a number of title standpoint, it's very small. We have 3,500 series of TV across the whole platform, and we probably have about 20 originals. But the consumption is a different matter. They overperform licensed content as a general matter.
Netflix is spending billions on original content. What is your programming budget like?
Well, we spend an awful lot of money. You know, obviously we aren't spending as much as Netflix is this year, but we're aggressively investing, and for us I think it's really important that we're selective and we're thoughtful about our content strategy.
You do seem to be licensing a lot of reruns, and I'm curious what the strategy is there.
Yeah, well, what we're trying to do is have the best, your favorite show. So when we look at licensing content, we're really focused on certain genres and certain content types as we match up our customers' wants, and so that's how we go about it.
Given how aggressively Netflix and Amazon are in this market now, I wonder how hard is it to get attention for these shows given all the competition? I mean, we're in the golden age of TV, but more isn't always better, right?
Yeah, well, when you look at the competition, there's 500 to 600 scripted shows put on TV every single year. And so what we're really focused on is breaking through the clutter of those shows. And so when we saw The Handmaid's Tale, we saw great scripts, we saw a great cast, and we started seeing the episodes come in, we thought we really have to put our weight behind this. And so we started the campaign out with 2 ads in the Super Bowl. And that's the level of marketing I think you have to do these days to try to break through, even if you have a great show.
Are you only as good as your last hit? Is it all about finding the next big hit?
Well, I think that's important. You can't just launch one and then not have any more in the future. So for us, we believe this is the first of many. We're excited about what we have in development and what we're in production on this year. We're doing another show with J.J. Abrams and Stephen King called Castle Rock that'll come out next year. We're making a show called Looming Tower, the Lawrence Wright Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. And so we have a lot of interesting shows coming, and you know, we hope this isn't the last. I
was speaking with Charlie Collier at AMC, and he said, you don't know what makes a good show. You just got to give it a try. But there has to be more to it than that. You guys must be doing some sort of experimentation and research into what works and what people want to watch, right? Well,
we certainly do, and there's a lot you can learn. But ultimately, it's about story, it's about characters, and it's about worlds. And I think if a show doesn't have 2 of those 3, and if you don't have 3 of those 3, it makes it really tough to break through.
Would you ever release a movie in theaters like Netflix and Amazon are doing?
Well, we haven't gotten into the original theatrical business. I'd never say never, but that's not part of our strategy today.
You've rolled out a live TV service. Curious about early results there.
It's going really well. You know, we launched it about 2 months ago. We've been rolling it out to new devices each and every week. We're updating the service. We've got 145 affiliates that we've onboarded across the country. And the demand has been really high. We're really going to push hard in the fall as we get the rest of our devices rolled out. And so I think you'll be hearing a lot about it in the fall.
Which networks have been the most popular?
You know, it's interesting. You know, when there's a live sporting event on, those tend to be the most popular. It's the same as on regular television. But we've been interested to see that, you know, lifestyle programming is doing really well. Of course, the big scripted shows. We launched HBO 2 weeks ago, and so Game of Thrones is awfully big on Sunday night, as it was everywhere. So it's not too abnormal from what you'd expect.
Any networks you had to leave out that you regret, that you couldn't bring along?
You know, for us, what we looked at is we tried to put together a package that starts with sports. And so we started out making sure that we had a compelling and competitive sports offering. And so we started there, and then we've added Scripps Networks, we've added A&E. And so we're comfortable with the packaging that we have today, and we'll see what happens in the future.
What is it like running a media company with 4 of the biggest media businesses and bosses as your bosses?
You know, you get a lot of benefits. We receive a lot of benefits by our ownership. Not only are they funding us and funding our ambitions, but obviously they're great partners. They're very smart people at all these companies that we lean on for resources. But it's a great organization, and we have 4 big media companies, as you said, and they're very powerful and helpful.
Do they ever disagree, and is that a problem? I mean, there must be creative disagreement. How do you handle it?
You know, I wouldn't say everyone agrees all the time, but, you know, I knew when I came in that they were aligned. You know, I was on the board of Hulu as a member of the Fox contingent, and when we reinvested in the company 4 years ago, everyone got on the same page, and it's largely been the case for the last 4 years.
You've said you're interested in international expansion. When and where?
Well, we haven't settled on that just yet. We're looking at a lot of different ideas. You know, when you think of us, we've got a free stream. We can stream for free, ad-supported. We've got an over-the-top pay TV service. We've got a subscription-on-demand service. So we have a variety of things that we can do internationally. And like I've said before, I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of years we're not talking about a few more markets.
People say we're in the golden age of TV. Do you agree? And if so, like, what's next? How does this evolve?
You know, it's interesting. If you go back 30 years and you look at what existed 30 years ago, you had 3 or 4 broadcast networks. Over the last 30 years, you've gone from that to 500 cable channels, and now all the stuff that's happening digitally. So I do think we're in the golden age, but I think choice and sort of genres is going to be the future. You know, you can find almost anything you want. You can find every show that's ever been made on your phone right now, and I think that continues over time. And so you're going to be able to see whatever you want, wherever you want it, and that's exciting.
My conversation there with Mike Hopkins, CEO of Hulu. Coming up, Swedish-based phone carrier Tele2 reported strong earnings this week. What is behind their growth? Next. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. O.J. Simpson will be paroled after serving nearly 9 years in prison for armed robbery and assault with a weapon. A Nevada parole board decided today that the 70-year-old former football and movie star will be released in October after serving his minimum term. France's President Macron has announced an increase in the budget of the armed forces for 2018 in an effort to limit criticism over his decision to cut funding this year. France's military chief stepped down Wednesday because of the cuts. Today, Macron informed soldiers and Air Force officials the ministry will receive an extra $2 billion. EU President Donald Tusk is urging Poland's president to meet him and discuss the changes the ruling party is making to the nation's judiciary. Polish lawmakers approved a law today that gives the president, not judges, the power to regulate the work of the Supreme Court and to appoint its judges. Investigators are trying to identify victims of the Grenfell Tower apartment building fire. They're getting some help from experts who worked on the recovery of victims after the September 11th terror attacks. The Metropolitan Police say the extraordinary size of the crime scene made that move necessary. At least 80 people died in the blaze. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg, just after 5:30 p.m. Thursday here in Washington. Already 7:30 Friday morning in Sydney. We're joined by Bloomberg's Paul Allen with a look at the markets. Paul, good morning to you.
Good morning, Elisa. Looks like a pretty quiet end to the week around the Asia-Pacific. Nikkei futures looking mixed right now, and here on the ASX, futures are off 0.2% after a couple of days of pretty decent gains. The big story locally at the moment is the Australian dollar, which just seems to keep on gathering strength. It almost touched 80 US cents on Thursday on the back of very strong jobs data. But what's really driving this along is US dollar weakness, and also the suggestion from the Reserve Bank in the minutes earlier this week that the neutral cash rate will be 3.5%. Right now, the actual cash rate is 1.5%. So we've got a couple of important speeches today in that regard. The Deputy Governor, Guy Debelle, will be speaking, and the Assistant Governor, Michelle Bullock. Both of them will have an opportunity to either reinforce or push back on this idea among traders that we could be heading into a tightening cycle here in Australia. Elsewhere, we're looking at the South Korea 20-day import-exports for July, and Capital Mall Trust will be out with earnings in Singapore. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Back to our lead story. Microsoft reporting sales and profit that topped estimates. Shares still up in extended trading. Adjusted sales rose 9%. Demand for its Microsoft's Azure cloud services almost doubling. Investors seem to be pleased by CEO Satya Nadella's turnaround strategy. His efforts to turn the company into a cloud computing juggernaut are paying off. Joining us now from New York, Anurag Rana of Bloomberg Intelligence. Anurag, the Microsoft earnings call is getting underway right now. Talk to us about your take on the high-end results, especially when it comes to the cloud.
I mean, all in all, a very strong result from Microsoft. It's tough to find any, holes in it at this point. I think the key would be on the call to learn about what the future estimates are for fiscal 18, especially on the expenses side. That has been an area of, discussion among investors that, as we look at next year, what kind of EPS growth can we see?
Right, and these data centers are really expensive. Yes. I mean, explain just the amount that Microsoft is investing in growing this business.
See, one of the most important things that you have to see is Microsoft is one of the very few companies that did not worry about the legacy products, and they actually invested very heavily into the cloud business. Back in FY10, their gross margins were around 80%. Now their gross margins are hovering around 60% or so, and a large portion of that is their efforts to move their product portfolio to the cloud, because in infancy, you need to invest a lot more, and those products are not as profitable. But as time goes along, the gross margins on those things should improve, which is what we have started to see now. This is very special for Microsoft, frankly.
Let's talk about some of those legacy products. Obviously, Windows is one of them. PC shipments are falling year after year. What does that mean for Windows?
See, at the end of the day, we think, when you look at Microsoft's Windows franchise, in the long run, it would be, we think, as a service business, where it would just be the foundation of what you do. Very similar to their cloud platform, Azure, where if you need any raw computing power or raw storage, you can use it. But the kick is going to be what kind of services do you add on top of it, which is, one of the things that they are pushing very strongly right now is, their new hybrid cloud product, Azure Stack. We think that has the potential to drive increased sales for the upcoming years.
What about Surface? Obviously, the hardware line has been struggling, but it is a small portion of their business. They've come out with new devices. Do you see potential for the Surface line to be truly reinvigorated?
The Surface line should improve in sales as time goes along. It's a matter of upgrading to a next cycle. But for Microsoft, hardware is not so much, it's not that they're going to make billions of dollars in hardware alone. This is one way for them to show their leadership in technology, the leadership in design, and what their OEM partners can do with the technology that they're building. It's all about the software. Hardware is just a way to showcase the strength in their software products.
How worried should Amazon and Google be about Microsoft?
I would say not so much, because the cloud market is so big that there is a place for everybody in it. Or I would say all the top players. One of the things I talk about regularly is if you look at total cloud spending, it hovers around $100 to $200 billion depending on who you ask. And total tech spending is about $1.5 to $2 trillion. So cloud as a percentage of total tech spending is still a very small portion. And as the market grows, there is place for a lot of players to be in it.
All right. Anurag Rana of Bloomberg Intelligence, thank you so much for joining us, breaking it all down. Well, Swedish telecom operator Tele2 reported impressive earnings this week. The phone carrier, with operations from Kazakhstan to the Netherlands, rose the most in 3 months. This after raising its full-year guidance and reporting accelerating Dutch subscriber growth. Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde caught up with Tele2 CEO Allison Kirkby earlier in London and started by asking what the secret sauce is to their recent successes.
Secret sauce, being very focused on connectivity. We're a very simple, focused challenger mobile operator, and our mission is to fearlessly liberate our customers to live a more connected life. And so we've been very much just pushing connectivity. We, for a number of years, we saw that over-the-top consumption would just increase, and we took the opportunity to think about, well, how are we going to monetize that over-the-top connectivity, and that's what we've been very much focused on.
And so the focus has been disrupting certain countries. In particular, you're into the Netherlands in a big way, shaping up new unlimited packages for only 25 euros. How are we seeing people move on to that? Are you managing to draw them from the competitors? Are you sparking any sort of price war here?
Yeah, well, Netherlands is a great example where the consumer has been very, very badly served for many years because pricing has been held very, very high. So versus, the average consumption in Sweden up until recently has been about 4.5 gig per month. Netherlands was less than 1.
Wow.
But since Unlimited has gone into the market, since we've challenged the other MNOs in the market, you've seen consumption increase already in the last year to 2 gig per month. And we think, consumers get a much better experience when they're on 4G networks than they are on Wi-Fi, not just from a speed point of view, but also from a security point of view. So we're very much stimulating demand onto 4G networks, and we believe once you get consumers onto the 4G networks, they stay with you longer, they become more loyal, and that's what we want, just very satisfied customers that stay with us.
And you want them to potentially trade up into bigger and better packages. How do you do that if you're already on an unlimited package, for example?
Well, what you've seen in other markets like Finland, where the average consumption is, I think, 10 or 11 gig per month, is they price behind speed differences. And they took advantage of the transition from 3G to 4G to do that. So there will be, as technologies change, there'll be new ways of offering new opportunities to trade up.
When you look at how Deutsche Telekom, Vodafone, Liberty Global have reacted in Netherlands, for example, how have they? Are they suddenly, like we saw in the US with T-Mobile, prompted everyone else to go to unlimited? Is that something you're seeing? And how do you keep a step ahead of that sort of competition?
Well, what you're seeing is KPN and the Vodafone Liberty merger. They're very much focused on pushing the converged services, the bundle. So they're pushing fixed and mobile and TV. But we're just pushing a very simple, great mobile product. So we're focused much more on the individual rather than the household. And so far that's working for us.
Yeah, why not go for that triple play or quad play mix though? It seems to have been the golden goose for a lot of the other players, particularly in Europe. Why does it not make financial sense from your point of view?
Well, the consumer doesn't really need it. They only go for it if the operator discounts a part of the service. And the individual is much more connected to the mobile device, whereas the household is connected to the TV and the fixed broadband. So we think it's two very different purchasing behaviours, and we've focused first on the individual and really pushing mobile technologies because we believe we've got the best mobile technologies to push there. We've not invested in our fixed network in the Netherlands, and so we're just pushing mobile for now.
You interestingly said security is a big theme as to why you'd like some of your customers to use 4G more than Wi-Fi, for example. Is security becoming really very prominent in your customer base's minds, particularly as we see hacking, very sadly, become a more regular occurrence?
Absolutely, and we see it very much in our enterprise businesses. Our B2B business in Sweden tends to support all of the big Swedish banks, and they're looking increasingly for us to help them develop products around security. And yes, with GDPR and the new legislation around privacy, the telco operators have a huge responsibility to protect individuals' private information.
Are the regulators getting it as well? Do we think that the right incentives are there to be able to help people become more cyber-focused?
It's not an area that the regulator has focused with individuals yet. I think they're putting much more pressure on industries that hold private individuals' information. But increasingly, when the consumer becomes more and more aware of these hacking occasions, then they look to those that hold their information and expect us to treat their information with the highest of standards.
Talking of regulators, of course, we've seen in Sweden some of the top telecoms companies, including yourself, starting to be investigated by the EU. The Competition Commissioner, Margaret Vestager, seems to be everywhere at the moment. How do you deal with that?
Well, you know, we were recently approached under an investigation, and you just accommodate all of their questions and give them all the information you need. And then we sit and wait and see what they come up with. But,
and you're sitting and waiting at the moment, is there?
Yes. No, all of the operators in Sweden were recently visited in April for an investigation, and we had them on our site for 3 or 4 days, and they've fully accommodated all of their questions, and they've taken that back to Brussels, and time will tell once they come back with further questions.
Are you worried about it, or investors worried about it?
No. We obviously, there's nothing to say that we've done anything wrong. We run our business with the highest of ethical standards. There's nothing to say that the investigation was triggered by any one allegation. You know, sometimes these investigations can be triggered just because they want to do some testing, or they want to test one legal aspect of some of the laws that are out there. We don't know, but time will tell.
Tele2 CEO Allison Kirkby there. And one more story out of Europe. The British government needs a few more weeks before deciding whether to let Rupert Murdoch's 21st Century Fox take over Sky. That's according to Culture Secretary Karen Bradley. She says she may still refer the deal to the Competition and Markets Authority for an investigation of Murdoch's media influence. Coming up, Fiat Chrysler revs up for its electric minivan tour, where the auto giant is focusing its push next. A reassuring sign for a retailer who's been battered by e-commerce. Sears has agreed to sell its well-known Kenmore appliances on Amazon. The chain will also integrate its smart appliances with Alexa, Amazon's speech-activated assistant. That means the company's air conditioners and other devices will respond to voice commands. Fiat Chrysler is setting its sights on Tesla's home turf with a new minivan that can run on a rechargeable battery. But range anxiety is causing the company to rethink its marketing strategy. Fiat Chrysler is calling the Pacifica model a hybrid and leaving out the plug-in part. Jamie Butters, automotive reporter for Bloomberg News, joins us now from Southfield, Michigan. So, Jamie, what's your take on their marketing campaign?
Well, I think it seems smart. You know, it's clearly their research shows that most Americans, especially minivan buyers who are not the most high tech or gear-headed sort of consumers, get a little bit of range anxiety from the whole idea of a plug. It fills them with the idea that they're going to get stuck by the side of the road with a car full of screaming kids, and they don't want that. But the California market is different. It is much more familiar with electric vehicles, with plug-in vehicles, battery hybrids, even fuel cell vehicles. So they got feedback from their marketers there that that this market was different, and please help us sell the plug.
Exactly. A state-specific campaign, Charge Across California. I mean, are residents of the Golden State that much more woke to electric vehicles?
Yeah, I think so. Largely you've got Teslas, which are very common in your neck of the woods, and I hardly ever see them here in Detroit. 2 or 3 of them, and so you have a lot of that, and it is a more advanced market. We always said, about Toyota and Honda, they first broke into the U.S. market really in California, very popular there, and then worked their way in toward the middle of the country. So we definitely saw some of that. And, the thinking is within a few years, everyone will be comfortable with plug-ins, but at this point, it's mostly a California thing.
Right, and you also have actual tech companies encouraging their employees to drive electric cars, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So many employers, especially in the Bay Area, but up and down the California coast, where you see, companies that have EV charging, parking spots, and you get better parking, you get to, charge up your car, then you don't even have to have a charging unit at home. And so that's where they're really focusing a lot of their efforts, their initial efforts, is going to these employers. About 80% of this Charge Across California tour is going to focus on workplace events where they can have people come down during their lunch, show them what the vehicle is like, maybe let them have a test drive.
So talk to us about the long-term plan for the Pacifica and how it is selling more broadly.
Well, it's a brand new vehicle, and it's kind of a breakthrough. Chrysler, the old Chrysler Corp, as it was known 4 generations ago under Lee Iacocca, really invented the minivan, And they've done well with it, but they've since kind of been eclipsed by Toyota and Honda with the Honda Odyssey and the Toyota Sienna that tend to sell at higher prices, kind of similar volumes to the Dodge and Chrysler minivans. They're still making the Dodge as a lower priced vehicle, but this new Pacifica, I wrote a story about it earlier this year. I mean, the regular one that's gas burning can cost $50,000, which kind of blew my mind for a minivan, but it drives nicer, it's better put together, they're winning quality awards over Toyota and Honda, which you just never used to see from a Chrysler. It is not their strength, and neither is fuel economy, but they're really trying to move upscale, stay competitive, go where consumer demand has gone, which is better quality vehicles, better interiors, better fuel economy, and including even some electric.
All right, Jamie Butters, our automotive reporter for Bloomberg News. Jamie, thank you as always. Coming up, OpenTable strategy for growth as the competition in food tech heats up, how the CEO sees the company fitting into the delivery landscape. And a quick programming note, Laurent Potvin, CEO of Lululemon, will be joining Bloomberg Surveillance, giving his outlook on the retailer. Catch that conversation 5:30 a.m. Eastern Time. This is Bloomberg. Facebook is planning to test a tool that'll drive more subscriptions to publishers. The new function would be included in the Instant Articles program. That is where publishers post news articles that are read directly within the social media site, instead of sending the user to the publisher's own website. The move could provide a much-needed benefit for newspapers and magazines as they focus on increasing subscriptions growth instead of print and digital ads. And there's been no shortage of tech companies focusing on food, as we know from Blue Apron's recent IPO and Amazon's bid to buy Whole Foods. I spoke with OpenTable CEO Christa Quarles about how the company's strategy for growth as competition heats up is shaping up.
There's two huge growth opportunities for us as we see them. One is to be a much more global company. We're part of the largest travel company in the world now, and yet we're better known in English-speaking parts of the world. And so the idea that we could become your global dining passport, where no matter what city you wake up in, Berlin, Dubai, Tokyo, that you could have a set of curated experiences that then you could go book is a huge opportunity for us. And the second big opportunity is really around having OpenTable stand for more than just fine dining, occasion-based experiences. I think we want to be known for everyday dining. You know, when you look at the frequency of our user, we know that they're going out to eat. You know, it's 2015 that spending on dining outside the home surpassed spending on dining inside the home. And we believe that we can be part of that more frequent education. So what does that mean for us? That means having more restaurants that are more casual in nature. It means rethinking what the reservation actually is. So if you look at our mobile app, within 90 minutes of seating time, 25% of our reservations are coming in that way. That's not a reservation anymore. That's a kind of a homing beacon for what's available around me right now. That's not a reservation. So thinking about the type of booking, or how do we connect a restaurant and a diner together, and so really being part of that everyday dining opportunity.
Yelp is getting into reservations. There's startups like Reserve. Airbnb is moving into experiences. What's your answer to that?
First of all, restaurants are a small, medium business category, and they are in many ways a linearly scaling model. It's, you know, person times quota equals restaurant growth, and we've been at it almost 20 years. And so just the enormity of that scale is hard to replicate quickly. You know, a lot of our competitors have, you know, 1,000, you know, some of them only have 200 restaurants. And so if I'm a diner who's looking for choice, that doesn't necessarily spell choice.
You have very long-standing relationships with restaurants. Would you ever get into something like delivery? And this is a very hot area, and I know all of these businesses do slightly different things, but, you know, there's just some sort of opportunity there. Just wonder how to execute it.
I think, and execution is the key here. I think that the logistics of delivery is incredibly challenging, and we're not going to play in that game. However, when I think about us being, in some ways, the operating system for a restaurant, to the extent that we can help them make sense of all the different delivery options, to the extent that we can help flow into how the kitchen works, then I think that OpenTable could play a part.
My interview there with OpenTable CEO Christa Quarles. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. All episodes are, of course, live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.